This week on Barbell Shrugged. This week on Barbell Shrugged.
This week on Barbell Shrugged, we interview Max El-Hag from Optimum Performance Training. Is that good?
You do it.
Right. You are Max, and that is it.
Welcome to Barbell Shrugged. I'm Mike Bledsoe here with Doug Larson down here in West Palm Beach, Florida for the Southeast CrossFit Games Regional. And we're sitting down with Max
El-Hag
from OPT. That's Optimum Performance Training, based out of Arizona from Scottsdale. And we're going to be discussing a little bit about program design and what they do at OPT. First, I wanted to get you guys to go over to barbellshrugged.com, sign up for the newsletter so we can inform you of all the stuff we're doing. We've got some training camps coming up, and we've got some seminars that you might be interested in. So we'll send you some information about that. Make sure to make it over to the Facebook page as well, and follow us on Twitter at Barbell Shrugged. You can ask us some questions there that we'll answer on the Daily BS, which you can find at barbellshrugged.com as well, in addition to this podcast. So we're sitting here with Max. He's a coach at OPT. You handle remote coaching clients, so people go to the website and they can hire you. And primarily you work with CrossFitters, is that correct?
Yeah, I'd say of my 40 athletes, probably 35 now are either CrossFit athletes or people that want to use CrossFit as a fitness conditioning program for longevity. So some of them are non-competing CrossFitters, but for the most part, they're CrossFit athletes. A little bit of MMA, a little bit of ultra-endurance running, and that's pretty much it in terms of, and some just body composition clients as well.
Okay. And you're originally from this part of the country here in Florida.
Well, I'm originally from New York and went to college in Pennsylvania, moved to Florida for a couple years, which is where I, had my entrance in CrossFit, and then moved from Delray Beach, Florida into Scottsdale, Arizona.
How long did you coach CrossFit before you joined OPT?
So I found CrossFit in 2009, I think late 2009. I was doing some MMA fighting amateur stuff because I wrestled in college, and it was just kind of like the next thing. I was like, man, I'm bored with my training. I was
told you were an uber legit wrestler.
I was
back in the day.
I was all right. I'm just washed up now. So I actually walked into a CrossFit gym. My fighting coach at the time told the gym owner, Dave Hochberg from CrossFit Delray Beach, basically to beat the shit out of me with training. So I did Fight Gone Bad with like 95 pounds. It was probably the worst experience of my life.
So Dave's right behind us.
Yeah, Dave is here laughing about the whole situation because he remembers. And I was so pissed off because he told me a goal target. I missed it by like 3 points or something like that.
He said that he gave you, 95 pounds on the bar?
Yeah, 95 pounds, I think.
And you scored 298?
Yeah, something like that.
It's legit. That's a good score.
Yeah, so I...
especially for a big guy.
Yeah. So I decided to, at some point in the near future after that, I decided that I didn't want to fight anymore, that I wanted to compete in CrossFit. So... I worked out to be on a team in 2010. I went to the regionals as an individual in 2011, and then just decided that I didn't want to compete anymore. I wanted to focus on coaching specifically. And through that time, I had gotten my CSCS. I had taken Poliquin Level 1 and Level 2 and BioSig and Functional Diagnostic Nutrition course. And I'm just kind of a book rat. And I loved the culture, I loved performance, and kind of this new wave of fitness that was kind of changing the paradigm of what truly was fitness for most people. And I hired, through that time, James was my coach, and I think we just had a lot of good dialogues, and he recommended a lot of good books that I just wanted to get like an understanding of like, hey, well, if we're doing intervals at 6 times rest of work and I fall off by X%, what are we really targeting? And we just had really good conversations about power output and that type of stuff. And I think he was just like, look, you're going to challenge me. You want to do this full time. And he called Dave, and it was either that or a master's program at FAU that I'd been accepted to. And I was like, so I moved out to Scottsdale, and currently I'm taking some undergrad prereqs to get into a PhD neuroscience program and coaching full time and doing research, basically.
Sounds like a sweet gig to make money while you're in school.
Oh yeah,
no kidding.
Yeah, I hopefully my quality stays up through school if I actually get into the program.
So Max's athletes, if the programming starts getting shitty, you know why?
Yeah, I just exposed myself.
Yeah, 'cause you're pretty much maxed out on people right now, right?
Yeah, right now I have 40 athletes, and I froze it. Especially, I froze initially through the opens because, the amount of, remote program design is tough enough on itself, but the actual coaching of emotions and dealing with anxiety and panicking about where you line up and your name's up there for everyone to see about how you do, and the email communication probably triples through the open. So I was like, at that point, I was like, I don't really want to take on more clients through that, and my income was high enough that I was happy. And after the opens, I was like, you know what? I don't think I want to lower my quality at any time. If I want to go on vacation, I just didn't want to be inundated with clients for more money. And I really get emotionally invested in how my clients perform relative to what they want. So I was just like, I'm just going to keep the freeze on for now.
During the open, during regionals, during the competition season, the clients you do have probably require a lot more time. I know that's the case.
Yeah, for sure.
Me. Yeah.
Yeah. And
taking on new clients is also time consuming. So doing it at the same time can be tough.
Yeah, it was just the right decision, and I decided to stick with it because, my retention rate is relatively long, and I have a long-term approach to development of any athlete. There's a few cases of people that are like, look, I want to make a run at this year's regionals. And unless they're one of those people, I think that you need a very long amount of time to actually create the appropriate physiological change to get what you're trying to get out of training. And, some people are trying to develop an aerobic system, and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to get good in 6 months. I'm like, well, that's just unrealistic. So I can't coach you to do that. I can coach your skill adaptation and certain things that you're missing in CrossFit, which will basically make it perceive that you have more power, right? If you can't snatch and you do 30 for time and you just get 0, and then you do 30 for time down the road because you're better at snatching and you finish in X amount of time and you measure your power, theoretically that's an exponential increase in power, but in reality it's kind of not in terms of the program design that created that. So I just take a much longer term approach. So I knew if I took more people on now, I'd be stuck with them through the opens next year, where there would be a ton of extra work for me, pretty much, and lower quality.
So what's that process look like? If I'm a brand new client for you, how does individualized programming work kind of from start to finish?
All right, so there's initial consultation period, which I think is one of the most important things, where we just basically sit down for an hour through Skype, and we just talk about training background, where you came from, what you're naturally good at, what you're not naturally good at, where your goals are, where you sat relative to your goals, how long you want to commit to this, what your lifestyle is like, what your job is like, what your nutrition's like, what your macros are like. And from that, I basically get an understanding of what I need to test. So, if somebody just simply is, hey, I want to be at the regionals. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you good at? I love really light Metcons. I can't deadlift 315. I can't power clean 225. I get an indication that this person's not powerful enough for the sport. Strength development's not good enough. I just kind of get basically an insight into whether or not is it speed strength? Is it absolute strength? Is it pulling strength? Is it mechanical strength? And I just, from there, create some sort of a testing period. And depending on the athlete, that could be 2 to 8 weeks to really get an indication of where they sit in all their data points that I'm trying to go after. And then on the back end, what they're not seeing is basically I create a skeleton and a long-term plan of an overarching basically design of what I would want to do. And then I send them anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks of design at a time. 6 weeks is usually as long as I go, and they're beginner-based clients or people that don't have specific goals, because it's really hard to moderate or like put a deload within a cycle if you do it 6 weeks long and you're like, oh shit, this guy's getting overreached, I need to back him off. So they create their blogs, they upload all their results and videos and all that stuff that I take a look at on a daily basis. And on the back end, I basically take all the results, put it into my Excel, and basically keep track of where they are from day to day and cycle to cycle. So I've priority retests and tests of what we originally started with. And over time, you know, that changes, your skeleton changes, things happen, you know, shit happens with people's lives. And that's pretty much how it works. We consult every 4 to 6 weeks via Skype for 30 minutes. Usually there's some sort of like texting or email back and forth that happens on a pretty regular basis. The longer my athletes are with me, or the more coaches they are. So a lot of people that work with me are coaches that want help on coaching other people. So the more they are that way, the less there is day-to-day communication, and the more they want like, hey, I have this athlete that does this. What can I do to get him better? Or why are we in this training phase? Or what are you trying to go after with this? Or how did I perform on this relative to what I should do? So I guess my role as a coach has kind of turned into like mentor-mentee in a lot of cases. And then I have a few, probably like 10 pure athletes. Like they're just robots. They just do what they're told. They email me when they need what they want. And so I have a good variety of what I do remotely, but that's pretty much the process.
So you're constantly getting feedback from your athletes, and that's why you do between 2 and 6 weeks out, because you can't do much further than that, because you get feedback, and then even if you did program 8 or 12 weeks out, shit's going to change anyway, so it's a waste of time. Yeah,
so I have a skeleton, or like, you know, let's say I want to go into a 12-week strength phase. I might go in and say like, okay, on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, this is what I'm doing. Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday off. And write 2 weeks of the design so that I can know when to go back into it. When I go back into it, I can progress it through the 12 weeks, but I'm getting feedback along the way so that if something changed, or if I prescribed a percentage that wasn't correctly, I can get it early enough that it's not like, oh, well, they went through this progression for 12 weeks and they fucked it up on week 1, and now I got to rewrite the progression. So generally the training phases get longer, either with more intermediate athletes or more simple training phases. Like if somebody's trying to, you know, improve their base running, just skill of running, I could probably design that out a little longer than I could if they're trying to like improve the mechanics of their snatch and pressing strength and burpee speed and speed of contraction on power clean. Like there's just so many variables within a CrossFit athlete that you just kind of have to be really on top of it. So I don't try not to go too long in my training phases with them.
I want to go back to something you said early on. What books did James suggest to you that you felt were like the most helpful?
Oh man,
I'm always on the lookout for books, and I get disappointed pretty frequently.
Yeah, so I mean I could just give some feedback. I'm a huge nerd. I probably read like a book a week. So then if they're not like textbook based books that take me a long time to kind of digest and read through, I think the original ones that I really got a lot out of were basically West Side Book of Methods, which is just Louis Simmons' like breakdown of conjugate method, Poliquin Principles, which shedded a lot of insight into the different strength qualities, how to train them, rest recovery, tempo, speed of contraction, how all that stuff changes. Lore of Running, which is just a dense physiological book. It can be applied very well to mixed modal testing, which I would say is CrossFit, but different than the sport of CrossFit, just a CrossFit workout. Healthy Intelligent Training, Lydiard's endurance book, and those are really the two. 8 Weeks Out is Joel Jamison's, or Ultimate MMA Conditioning is great, which I got after I had already been with James. But those four, I think, laid the foundation for me getting a real understanding of both ends of the power spectrum, and then basically learning how to blend and hybrid them to come into the middle and really be effective in my design for CrossFitters, or MMA athletes, or really anyone that needs to be good in that, I don't know, minute to 20-minute time frame, let's say.
That's a good book for anyone, even if they're not an MMA fighter.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the principles go across all sports, more or less.
Yeah, and I talk to Joel relatively frequently, and he's a smart dude. And generally, like, really smart guys, when they write books, the book is really dumbed down, so you can't really get an understanding of, like, what's going on if you.
That's what you think. Other people reading it are like scratching their heads. You know what I mean?
Well,
they're probably he's
maybe.
writing it for an athlete.
Yeah.
If you're a coach and you're trying to read it, well, depends on how knowledgeable you are as a coach. But
they don't think it's dumbed down.
And
his
is
really complicated, but it really is dumbed down.
Yeah.
That's as simple as they can make it.
But I think his is it can really touch both ends of the spectrum, like a new coach or a purely athlete or somebody who's like, 30 years in the training business with a PhD in anatomy and physiology or something. I think anyone can take away from that book. I think he did an awesome job. I'm plugging his book, but it was solid.
But you like it.
Yeah, so I'd say those 4 are a good foundation. And I'll throw Super Training in there just because it's a great book, but it's really dense.
That is not a dumbed down book.
Yeah, so if you're gonna read that book, you have to know a lot about just anatomy, biomechanics, just pick that up only if you really want to get into a real.
Did you ever see Mel Siff speak before he died?
No, I haven't.
He was awesome.
Yeah.
He was super animated on stage.
Nice.
Yeah, cool guy.
Yeah.
You also help with the course designs. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, so the design of the course was pretty much completed prior to me getting to OPT. So I just so I've sat in all of them. I had taken almost all of them except for life coaching prior to being at OPT as a coach, and so I sat in them and basically gave him my feedback about what needed to be changed, what our customers or our clients or our coaches weren't getting out of the courses that they needed to get out of, and then basically doing continual research on things that I thought needed to be upgraded over time, because we all know like fitness changes overnight and the data is just exponentially increasing, and it's so easily accessible. So I just don't think that you should have a course that stays stagnant over the years. So upgrading of course content would probably be what I would say I do for the courses. And then I developed my own course, which is a program design application course, which was basically created because I thought most people that were taking our courses weren't getting everything they needed to be effective at even learning how to program. So the program design level 1 course is like, teaching people the alphabet. Writing programs is like poetry, and I thought there needed to be some sort of middle ground where it was like, hey, this is how you create sentences and this is how you use
Right, yeah.
So I was trying to create a bridge because I always found myself answering questions, and when I graded the practicals I was like, man, these are like not where I would expect them to be for people who have been doing this for a long period of time. So it was just kind of my best attempt at creating that bridge. So that's almost completed development, and I'm running my first one in the end of June. So that's pretty much my role in the courses.
If someone wanted to take a program design course, what would that look like? I went there.
Yep.
I was at OPT about a month ago, and I took the life coaching.
Yep.
Because I've always wanted to take something like that before.
Yep.
And Mike McGoldrick suggested, he's like, hey, they're having a life coaching course the same time I'm there.
Yep.
So I roomed with him and went and did that. And my expectations were high, but it definitely exceeded my expectations.
Nice.
I have not done any program design or anything like that with OPT. What would I expect if I want to do that?
So the assessment and program design courses and nutrition can all be taken online. But basically the structure of it is assessment is a prerequisite to program design. And assessment is basically a movement screen to teach people how to come in the door and basically assess dysfunction of movement. It's a derivative of Gary Gray and just basically simple, like right to left imbalance and structural, like, hey, look at this, look at internal rotation of this. And it's not super in depth. All of our coaches don't always use it. People do FMS or people create their own.
Right.
Some people people come in the door, put a PVC pipe in your hand and do an overhead squat, or everyone has their own, but it's just a baseline for coaches to say like, okay, how does this person move? How do they move? And where do they move effectively, and where should they never be? And then there's a body composition analysis, which teaches people calipers and gives insight into what fat distribution in certain points of the body can mean hormonally. Then there's a work capacity section that basically gets a baseline of wherever your athlete is. And that in itself could be a course. It's 1/4 of a 2-day course. So it's like a very crammed, it's a topic that gets really crammed. And that's where all the questions come out of like, oh, well, I got this and I got that and I got that. And that's basically the foundation for getting into program design. And program design is 3-day course, or again, it's online, where you can get videos and handouts and all that stuff. There's weight training, alactic training, lactic training, periodization, and progression, basically. And each 3 days basically goes through the same structure of the 3 different energy systems. The aerobic system.
There's 3 days dedicated to each section?
There's 1 day dedicated to each section, and then there's probably like some residual time that's, question and answer, periodization, skeleton and templating of years. And a lot of it now, especially because our market is largely CrossFit, is how to apply these principles to improve CrossFit athletes mixed modally. I forgot in the assessment, there's also a physical assessment, which is like requisite levels that you should have in each of the movement patterns. So like there's upper body pull, where there's like a scapular strength, a number of strict pull-ups, a weighted pull-up, and it goes up to level 5. In each movement, there's core, upper body push, squat, single leg squat, bending, and that's the 4th component of the assessment course. So that's pretty much the structure. You can either take it in person and do the homework, or you can take it online and do the homework.
That's very cool.
Yep.
So we were talking to Dave a little bit before this, and we were all kind of, there's about 4 or 5 of us standing around talking about how on the mobility side of things, when we all got into CrossFit originally, how we were probably screwing people up. We couldn't understand why people weren't able to overhead squat. And we're like, why can't they overhead squat? We just didn't have the knowledge at the time that, maybe their shoulders or their ankles are jacked up. And how, it's okay to, not be, when you start coaching, no one's going to be very good at what they're doing. Your eye is not going to be trained yet, and that only comes with experience, and that's okay. But, you got to keep learning somehow.
Yeah, I think the biggest sin is just complacence as a coach, and I try to learn from everyone, and I'm sure I actually have an ego, but I try not to have an ego when it comes to education, because I really do think you can learn from everybody. And I pay for consultations with people that, some people might be like, hey, why the hell would you pay money to talk to that guy? And then on the flip side, I'll debate or argue with anyone just for the sake of learning and upgrading my own craft. So yeah, I still fuck up all the time. It's the human component of anything. None of us are perfect. And anytime you think you're perfect, I'm sure something will come out where you realize you're an idiot.
So you get showed differently.
Yeah. So I would, obviously I think our courses are great. I promote them all the time, and it's my job to promote them. But I think that people should get knowledge everywhere. So if it's not OPT, it should be Paul Chek, or it should be books, or it should be Poliquin, or it should be CrossFit continuing education, or it should just be traveling the country and meeting with people, because there's an endless supply of knowledge, and you don't have enough brain power to get it all. So
don't forget the Barbell Shrugged shop. There's seminars where you can learn things.
Yep, for sure. I forgot that one.
So briefly talk about the essence of the athlete and the different animals, like we briefly spoke of before the show started.
Yeah, for sure. So I know it's been, like any message, when it comes from the prophet's mouth, as it gets dispersed through a community of all those people who listen to it, it gets butchered and destroyed. But basically it started as a
telephone game.
Yeah, for sure. So the message starts out pure, and then by the time it gets there, it's like, sounds nothing like what we originally talked about.
Right.
Jaguars and buffaloes.
Yeah, so that's important to know as a coach. When an athlete comes and says, well, this other coach told me this thing, you're like, well, he probably said this other thing, and then you heard this, and then now when you told it to me, you forgot the majority of it, and now I think the guy's an idiot because you didn't remember what he actually said.
Yeah.
I've had athletes that come to me and go, well, Doug told me different. I'm like, no, he didn't.
He did not say that.
I was like, we may differ on some things, but he did not say that.
That's what you heard him say, because that's what you already believed. That's right. So anyway, sorry, I derailed you.
No worries. So Jaguar and Buffalo were basically just a way, and James is into like shamanistic rituals and basically creating like animal spirits of people.
Everyone that doesn't know James thinks he's weird as shit right now.
So James is a very, very smart guy, but he's weird, and he'll tell you that he's weird, just like all of us will tell you that we're probably all weird if we're honest with ourselves.
Agreed.
But jaguar and buffalo were basically just animal representations of the two ends of the power spectrum. Okay. So a jaguar was this insanely powerful person who really operated well in the short time frames, really powerful, really strong, not so enduring, not a lot of slow twitch tissue. And then the buffalo was
sprinters and weightlifters.
Exactly.
Yep.
And the buffalo was just basically a slow, enduring animal that could just grind and trudge. Over time, that has developed into like 5,000 things. There's like a cheetah, which can be like somebody who's really fast and explosive under no loading, but then you put them under loading and their force development drops. Like typically sprinters and jumpers are like that. Like they seem really powerful, but then you put a weight in their hand, you're like, why are they slow with weight? Whereas a weightlifter is more of a jaguar with a pure sprint or an unloaded event. Their speed and force development might not be as high, but when you put them under load, you're like, holy shit, that guy can move. And then in CrossFit, it's not so simple. You can't just be like, oh, that guy snatches 300 pounds. He's a jaguar. He should be doing this. And that's what it turned into, right? It turned into how strong are you? And that's what derives your essence. And that's so far from the truth because, you know, you can be more of a buffalo or more of an aerobic athlete and really strong because a lot of things go into strength qualities, like where do your tendons insert? What's your muscle physiology like? What's your training background? How much tonic stiffness do you have in your muscles? All of that's going to play a part. It's not just how your nervous system is wired.
You may disagree, but when I watch say Rich Froning versus Dan Bailey, I see a buffalo versus a jaguar.
Exactly.
Like,
and
you got Rich Froning, who's probably more of a buffalo. Slow, consistent. He's just strong as fuck.
Yeah.
And then you have Dan Bailey, who's also strong as fuck, but that dude's fast.
Yeah, and I think over time, well, first of all, just as a simple basis, I don't believe those two people should be training anything alike because you're not trying to create the same adaptation.
Right.
So one of them's way too powerful for the sport or explosive for the sport and not as enduring. And what he gets done is still out of control. So I'm not saying that Dan Bailey's not the sixth fittest person on the planet or he's not good in the long time domain. He's insane. He's great, yes. But he's much less enduring than somebody like Rich in terms of like how many contractions can he do in a certain time period and how well can he endure a long weekend or 4 days of events, right? A lot of that has to do with how well developed your aerobic system is and also probably how efficiently you move and a lot of other variables. But I do agree. I think that over time you're going to see almost all CrossFitters are much less explosive and powerful and they're much more strong but enduring. And I think just a simple measurement is you could take front squat to clean numbers to see like, well, how big is somebody's front squat relative to their clean, all things being equal about efficiency of movement of the clean. And the higher you can get in terms of what your clean is relative to your front squat as one simple measure, the more explosive and fast you are.
Yeah. We actually talked about that on a last podcast when talking to a weightlifting coach.
Okay.
Talking about like efficiency of your clean.
Yeah.
To your front squat.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's not a direct correlate because positional of front squatting,
there's a lot
how
of variables
efficient
there.
you change from like second pull to your retreat, all of that comes into play. But that's just a simple variable. Maybe like deadlift to power clean's another one, or press to split jerk. You can just over time as a coach, you develop an eye to understand that. Like, even though this guy moves a lot of weight, he's really not that explosive, relative to how strong he is.
That's my excuse. I tell people I'm a jaguar.
Yeah.
Anything over like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I use that pretty frequently too.
So if you take Rich and Dan, how would you have them train differently? I have no idea how they train specifically relative to each other right now, but like in a theoretical world, how would they be training if one was a buffalo and one was a jaguar?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to use Rich and Dan because Rich won the games, so you can't really make a case that he's doing anything wrong. And Dan finished 6th, so it could just be that the 5 people above him have more genetic potential, or that he had a bad weekend, or the workouts were skewed. But if I had 2 people on the spectrum, a jaguar and a buffalo, and I was trying to basically get them away from their essence or get them farther away from each end of the spectrum, the least powerful person would do a lot more strength training, power development, rest recovery stuff, and the more powerful person would be doing much more long, slow distance, trying to convert his fast twitch fibers to uptake oxygen a little bit better, getting better at tolerating volume, and, you know, when you're dealing with CrossFit, you also have to come to a point that you have to give them fatigue-based training to get them used to Metcons. So generally, just a basic principle that I teach people is if you have a 12-month cycle and you're doing a year's worth of training, you can do a lot of your interval training and conversion and base development stuff for 8 months of the year, and then 4 months has to be specific. And if it's specific to the opens and what we've seen, a lot of what's in the opens is really light weights, really simple movements, really high turnover of contraction, a lot of demand for blood flow, a lot of demand for oxygen, and you're training those things and trying to create scenarios where there's bottleneck gymnastics and all this stuff that HQ is deeming tests of fitness. So for 4 months of the year, you throw the Buffalo and Jaguar shit out the window, right? Because you have to train for the sport. But in the off season, as you're trying to develop, that's just a simplistic version of what I would do. Cool.
And so a lot of people, when they're first starting CrossFit or CrossFitters 5 years ago, they would just do that 4 month period, but all year long.
Yeah.
They would just CrossFit all the time. Yeah. And that's not what most high level guys are doing anymore.
Yeah. Well, the thing with high level guys is that even if they're doing a 4-time stuff, there's either an inherent insane level of capacity that nothing is truly ever all out, or they have the tolerance of volume built up from something else, whether it was an aerobic sport or wrestling or water polo or whatever it was, to create a mechanical and endocrine nervous system base to be able to tolerate that intense volume often. And usually when you first get into something, there's a skill adaptation period. So, you know, you do chest to bar pull-ups and thrusters for time when you're 2 months into CrossFit. You can't really put that much power out because you're just learning how to do thrusters. They're relatively light. You're learning a new skill in chest to bars. You might not have finishing strength in your rhomboids. Your hands might tear. So generally you're not putting out enough power for it to really be truly high intense. So I consider almost all of that, which could last from 4 months to 5 years in some people's cases if they have no training background. I just call it skill adaptation to CrossFit. And there's really no energy system that it is. They're just learning how to do the sport, how to do the movements and all that stuff.
A lot of people are just going to get good practicing the sport.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think in any sport, people just play the sport to get better at the sport. Like in basketball, if you can't shoot a jump shot, you're not playing pickup games 5-on-5. You grab a bunch of balls and you go out to the court and you shoot hoops. Weightlifters, if they're having trouble with the snatch and positioning at the bottom, they might do drills and snatch balances and overhead squats and sit in the bottom and PVC drills. And I think in any sport, there's an inherent need to learn and develop all the skills necessary. And some people can get lucky that the design of the Metcons just lined up really well over the course of that period, that they learned all the skills appropriately. And some people don't do it so well or don't learn the skills well enough, and when the intensity spills over above what their body's able to tolerate, you start to see issues, and you can maybe see mechanical tears, if they were doing kipping pull-ups but they didn't have enough requisite mobility or strength in the lats to be able to tolerate the speed of contraction under fatigue, or it could be endocrine wise because they're doing too many high-intensity sessions per week than they can recover from with all the fish oil and post-workout in the world just can't offset. And you see that in everything. It's not a bash to CrossFit. Weightlifters will tell you they go into CNS fatigue. Wrestlers will tell you that they have low testosterone in the off-season. Fighters just have low testosterone. People in the military have low testosterone. But in CrossFit, a lot of it can be controlled and moderated with proper deloading, off-season time, sub-maximal work, purely skill development sessions. So a lot of people start with me and they're like, man, this sucks. I'm practicing double unders and snatches and doing external rotation work and power raises and Cuban presses 2 days a week. I'm like, yeah, well, you've only been training for 2 years. You can't hit it hard 6 days a week. And in 5 years, you might be able to, and you probably will. But when you look at the elite now, they've been in it for 5 or 6 years, right? So they started with like, oh, you know, 1 workout every 10 days because you're so fucking sore you can't walk, and now they're doing 20 a week. So we just basically take all the principles of strength and conditioning, try to apply it to something we love in CrossFit, and, you know, and just do our best at coaching that.
As a remote coach, how do you guys handle technique?
Oh, man, I outsource. So I am getting to the point now where I'm going to start having prerequisite levels of things you need to do to work with me because it's almost impossible. I will cue my better athletes of things that need to improve to go from like 95% efficiency to 100, or maybe 90 to 95, because no CrossFitter should be 100% proficient in anything really, unless they're that proficient in everything.
Right.
I usually just say, like, look, you run like shit, go find a pose coach, or you suck at Olympic lifting, go to a Everett seminar, or go find somebody to do one-on-ones. And I think the most efficient return on your investment is one-on-one work. So I say, look, if you suck at gymnastics, go find a gymnastics gym, find a 25-year-old coach who's interning there, and pay him $60 an hour to just work with you, because most of the shit you need to do for CrossFit is not that high level.
Not for gymnastics.
Yeah. Snatch and clean and jerk, even most just good lifters who have a little bit of understanding of the actual lifts and mobility that's needed can probably help you. And I do that on a person-to-person basis. So like if somebody can't scoop in a clean, I might just have a whole cycle where they do block work from the high hang, and I might have them doing 3-position pulls. But the technique that is developed from a good program design around that is like a very small fraction of what would just be developed if you gave them a one-on-one workout. So sometimes I tell them, look, if you want to work with me, you got to fly out here, spend a couple days. You're going to pony up a big amount of money to work hour to hour with me, but it's necessary. Or find a coach and send me who they are. I'll take a look. And I know a bunch of people around in a bunch of different areas now that I trust. So that's usually what I do. But like with any form of coaching, there is downfalls, and technical development is definitely something that's tough with remote design.
What about nutrition? Do you guys help with that too?
Yeah, so we do outsource some of the nutrition stuff, and then I do a lot of my own nutrition with my clients. I've done functional diagnostic nutrition and consulted with Rob Wolf a couple times, and taken nutrition courses at OPT, and spoke with Matt Lalonde a bunch of times, and I have enough of an understanding of what needs to go down, but I think that nutrition is a much smaller piece of the puzzle than a lot of the community believes, and I might get ridiculed for that. I think most of the problem with CrossFit athletes is that they just purely underfuel. They just undereat.
Agreed.
Undereat macros, undereat nutrients, or maybe they get enough nutrients because they eat so many vegetables, but they just don't eat enough for the training volume. So I just look at macros, and I'm a simple, like, if you're getting the right amount of shit and you feel good and your bowels move good and your sex drive is good, I don't give a shit as long as your performance is going up. When we have problems, I say go to a doctor, get blood work. Let's work with a real nutritional specialist if you're having trouble digesting grains, or, if gluten is that big of an issue, let's see if you're really celiac, or maybe your gut is just so poor that it can't even tolerate that and you're so not resilient to begin with. And I think that's an issue. If you're so non-resilient to certain things, I think of you as not resilient to training as well. So I might lower your training volume and try to lower your stress and get you to sleep better, and look at, maybe you have parasites in your gut, or I just think that people get way too caught up in nutrition. So what I look at is, are you getting enough? And then I do everything else on a case-by-case basis.
I think that's been a big issue lately, is what I've seen is everyone is so paleo that they don't get enough. It's fine if you're doing, a 45-minute workout 3, 4, 5 days a week, but if you're training multiple sessions a day and you're not getting enough carbohydrates, and you're not going to get enough carbohydrates from, like, probably fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
You're going to have to fuel up with maybe rice and potatoes, and if you're trying to keep it cleaner. So.
Yeah, so, my biggest problem is that paleo, I think of as just a food quality diet.
Right.
People have associated paleo with some low-carb ketogenic version of clean eating. And I think that's a huge problem, especially in a sport that demands an enormous amount of glycolysis. So it just makes no sense. So I do think people should eat good quality food. I think they should eat organic if they have the money for it. I think they should try to get most of their carbohydrates from gluten-free sources. That being said, I think that doing that too much promotes so much imbalance in lifestyle that you're focused on so much of the wrong shit and creating anxiety about so much of the wrong shit, where I'm much more focused on training if you're a performance athlete. So I generally tell people to eat a ton of gluten-free grains, moderate amount of fruit, and good quality proteins and fats. But I'm much more lax with both myself and all my athletes in terms of what you're eating. If people like want to go out and binge one day a week, I'm okay with that as long as you can tolerate it and doesn't have long-term consequences on any of your biomarkers and health. Body fat distribution, if it's an issue or I care about that in terms of my structure, or performance.
How often do you guys test that stuff? Blood markers or body fat?
Body fat as often as I see them, or if I know someone in the area that can either, or if they have like a bod pod or DEXA scan. Like a lot of people are near colleges that will do that kind of frequently.
That's where I was at DEXAs.
Yeah, for relatively cheap.
Because it was free.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Don't tell everyone that. At home, I think it's $100.
Yeah, I thought it was more than that. Yeah,
it's $150 at home.
Yeah,
for U of M.
Yeah. So that's definitely not too bad to do like every 3 or 4 months. If it's calipers,
it's
and
like the most accurate way, by the way.
Yeah,
If you can get DEXA, that's the gold standard.
Yeah, for sure. And caliper work I'll do whenever I see them in person. For CrossFit, ironically, I don't think is that important because I think most people need to get fatter to be good at the sport. And I think if you look at any aerobic sport, their body fat distribution is higher than an anaerobic sport. And CrossFit is an energy production sport. You need to be strong and you need to have good skills. But I think you're going to start to see that a lot of mostly female competitors will start to put on some body fat.
You think just hormonally they'll be better if they have a little bit more body fat?
Yeah, hormonally, and yeah, I mean, even the carbohydrate need to fuel the sport, I think, is just going to put on body fat. And I think the amount of stress from that amount of training might lower some of the anabolics and just make people higher in body fat. I mean, the leanest people in the world are bodybuilders, and they generally do weight training, low carbohydrate dieting, and very easy aerobic training. Very easy.
If any at all in some cases.
Yeah. And there's a whole movement now of bodybuilders that believe that aerobic training is the, the killer of leanness.
Yeah.
So
that's always been a big debate.
Yeah. So for sure, I just think that most people are way too focused on their body image and they're losing out on performance. And I'm cool with that as long as they know that if body composition is on the list of priorities, it might blunt performance at some point down the road.
Yeah, I think that if someone's getting leaner, they're probably not getting enough carbs on the performance side of things. They're probably not getting enough glycogen resynthesis.
Yeah.
And you got to kind of ride that line. I mean, you don't want to eat so many carbs after you train that you're putting on just shitloads of fat. But you want to, if you keep getting leaner or you're not putting on going through phases where you're not putting on a little bit.
Yeah,
you're probably not performing at your best each training session.
And the genetically elite, the people at the top, you can't use as metrics for yourself. I mean, those people would walk around maybe at 3% body fat if they didn't do CrossFit. So when they're at 7 and they look shredded and awesome, it could actually be fat for them. And so much of image is how much water is held between the fat and the muscle and between the skin and the fat and how tight your skin is. And it's not always what you think. The better you get with calipers, sometimes you'll see people and you're like, man, you look so lean, like full 6-pack, striations everywhere, vascular, and you'll see, 26 millimeters on their umbilical site, and you're like, holy shit, like, I would never have guessed that. So
I wish that was me.
I think we all wish that was us.
Mine's pretty realistic. Like, fat is fat.
I'm like, I'm a little soft here. And yes,
I don't think you have any folds that are 26 millimeters, but maybe half that.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break real quick. When we come back, maybe we'll talk a little bit about BioSignature.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I guess.
Welcome back to Technique Quad. My name is Doug Larson from the Barbell Shrugged Podcast. You can find us at barbellshrugged.com. Today I want to talk about body types with respect to weightlifting. If you watch the show or you've watched a lot of other Technique Quads, you've probably heard me say before that the best weightlifters tend to be short people that have long torsos and very short limbs. People that have that particular type of body structure and limb length proportion tend to be very good weightlifters naturally. People that have the opposite structure, people that are taller and people that have short torsos and longer limbs tend not to be very good at weightlifting, which is why there's not a lot of very tall, especially high-level weightlifters. You know, just like something like basketball, there's a body type that fits the sport, and those people tend to be best at that particular sport. So it's definitely like that for weightlifting. Shorter people, long torsos, short limbs tend to be best. Most of us aren't like that, and we're not that lucky to be of that particular body type, and so we have to make different adjustments in order to have the technique be easy for us to perform correctly. So myself, I happen to be a little bit of a taller athlete. I'm not super tall. I'm only 5'11", but I got long limbs, which is great for throwing baseballs, but it's not great for doing Olympic weightlifting. So my short torso and my long limbs makes it where I have to have some different adjustments to have good technique. So for me, as a person that has that short torso and longer limbs, it's going to be very difficult for me to squat or do any amount of Olympic weightlifting with my feet very narrow and my toes 100% straight ahead. For me, it's easier to toe out quite a bit, and here's why. If you look at me here, if I'm a person that has good weightlifting mechanics, I can have my feet close together, toes straight ahead, and I can put my knees straight forward, and I can be in a position where when I stand up, the bar doesn't hit my shins. That does not work for me. In order for me to get my knees out of the way of the bar, I really only have one option in this case, and that's to pop my butt up and then try to fix my position after the fact. Because I have bad mechanics, I either, like I said, I have to pop my butt up to get out of the way, or I have to move the bar around my knees. And the general rule is that you shouldn't pop your butt up and that you should always move your knees around the bar, never the bar around your knees. The bar, in fact, if you look from the side, if I'm doing this correctly, the bar should kind of come back into me, and I shouldn't be moving the bar around my knees. So if you're a person that has a short torso and longer limbs, the other option that you have, instead of picking my butt up to move my knees out of the way, is to push my knees out to move my knees out of the way. So here, if I don't bend my knee any more or any less, it's right up here. If I move my knees out a lot, they come back quite a bit. So what I want to do to keep that very upright back angle is, for me as a person that has a short torso and longer limbs, I'm going to have to push my knees out further, and that's going to help me stay very upright, but at the same time it's going to get my knees out of the way of the bar. So if I'm cleaning, if you look at me from the front, if I'm cleaning, I clean right about here, and I push my knees out a lot. And then for me, since I push my knees out a lot, I have to move my grip wider in order to have room for my knees. Okay, now when I go to clean, I can push my knees wide like this, where I have that diamond shape with my legs. That way I can get into a good position here. Okay? If my toes are straight ahead, I can't push my knees out quite far enough, so I usually have to toe out just a little bit. I'm usually about right there. So that's about where I am. Okay? You can make adjustments with how wide your feet are. You're going to have to play with it depending on how long your arms are and how much ankle mobility you have and whatnot. The same thing goes for snatches. For me, when I snatch, I can't snatch. It's even harder because I have to get lower. If I had my feet straight ahead like this, it's already touching my shins. If I try to stand up and keep this back angle, I'm already grinding my shins and I haven't even got off the ground yet. So what I have to do when I snatch is toe out quite a bit. I'm here. Now my hip is below my knee and it's barely touching my shin, but as I stand, I can push my knees even wider. I can keep my butt down and I can make it all the way past my knee. Again, in that diamond position, heel heavy, I can rock right into this power position, and I can have had a good upright back angle the whole time, all the way past my knee, and I never end up in a situation where I have to pop my butt up and then try to finish late, or where I have to move the bar around my knees. So, if you are a person like me, short torso, long limbs, I want you to try to make that adjustment where you are toed out a little bit, your knees are still outside of your feet. I don't want you to toe out and then still have your knees diving in. That's bad technique no matter what you're doing. But making this adjustment makes it where doing your first pull is much more likely to look good, feel good, and to put you into a better second pull position. Did I miss anything? All right. If you have more questions, you can go to barbellshrugged.com, click the Ask a Question tab at the top of the page, and you can fill out that very short survey and ask us a question on the website.
If you like this video or any of our other videos, make sure to share it on your Facebook wall by clicking share, and then the Facebook icon, and then also like it. Thanks, Shrug Thugs.
And we're back talking with Max from OPT. And when we left, I said that I want to talk a little bit about BioSignature and how you guys use that and how you program, and maybe nutrition too.
Yes. So James is...
Get a little closer.
Oh, sorry. James's foundation in strength and conditioning after academic education was as an intern with Charles Poliquin as he was aggregating data for his courses or what now is his courses, BioSignature, PICP, level 1, level 2, level 3. So the BioSignature course is basically a course on how your body fat distribution is affected by endocrine patterns. And they have a software that basically takes all of your, I think it's a 10-point, takes all of the 10 points of data, puts it into a software, and basically tells you what supplement protocol you need to follow to fix the hormonal problem that you have. And I don't know, a simple one would be love handles have been correlated to poor insulin function. Belly fat has been correlated to stress.
Beer intake.
Yeah,
it's cortisol for belly. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
High pec relative to tricep could be aromatase conversion and testosterone problems. And there's a ton of them. Mm-hmm. And there's all these variants of supplement protocols that you can take to supposedly correct them. So,
so is there controversy with that thought process?
Yeah. So I think that just empirically, and then the data that we found, because we do a lot of blood work, we have doctors on site. We do just a lot of research on, and I think on our membership site, there's actually a body composition references section in the forum. I actually know there is because I created it. And there's a ton of just scientific articles about contradictory things to the original premises of these things. I do think that he does have a lot of truth in it. I just think that a lot of times they're half truths. So he
pretty much just correlated skin fold measurements with blood work.
Yeah,
is what he did.
Yeah, so he correlated body fat distribution patterns with blood work.
He had a lot of I guess a lot of people he was looking at, and he was also had a lot of freedom.
Yeah, so
which was unusual for a coach.
Yeah, so I don't think the data has ever been published, so I've never seen it, or if it is published, I haven't seen it. I think I heard on one of the original podcasts of Rob Wolf way back in the day, he attended and he asked for it and was ridiculed or something. I don't know if that's a truth, but anyways, so our original sites are close to where those sites are, and we talk about how endocrine patterns in our assessment course, how endocrine patterns could indicate some of these things. We've seen that the numbers he uses for health parameters are way too low, which in my eyes would make sense for a business, because if you're selling a supplement protocol that the end goal is a leanness level that most people can't get to, then you're always bought into continual purchase of that.
Chasing the dragon.
If you can make high cholesterol 160, you sell way more drugs.
Yeah, for sure.
There you go.
So
instead of 200. For anyone that didn't know that.
Yeah, so Yeah, so there have been disagreements. We have research to support it. So it's not like we're just coming out and saying like, "Oh, this is bullshit."
So are you guys publishing your research, or how?
Well, it's not our research. It's just research that has been done that we found on journal publication sites. And then also we have empirical blood work on a ton of. Well, I don't want to say a ton because people might ask me to quantify that, but maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 people that would. 20 of my own athletes, and James probably has a ton more. And if you want specific numbers, you can email him if he's willing to show it. I don't think you can share medical data anyway. And our doctors have all the medical records, and we just basically have to get permission from our clients to share and have this back and forth relationship about what's going on with the endocrine pattern. So I don't even know if it's possible to publish data on that unless you're a medical facility.
Rules are always fucking up research, I swear.
Yeah, for sure. So I have probably about 20 of my own athletes that would have something that goes counter to what he said, either a high pec level with high testosterone and low sex hormone binding globulin and things that you wouldn't see in somebody who's converting their testosterone into some hybrid version of estrogen, or people with high belly fat scores that have good adrenal curves and good DHEA to total cortisol sum, and people with low calf numbers who have high liver enzymes, or whatever the case is. I have a bunch of just small things like that where I'm like, oh, this doesn't line up. And then just simple things like ethnicity plays a big role. He did talk a little bit about that in the course that I went to, so I'll give him credit for saying that each area of the country or of the world should have its own biosignature. But the software doesn't do that. So if somebody's, I think Latino and African-American females naturally store a higher percentage of body fat in the lower half naturally. And I think on the site there's 2 or 3 references to that specifically. And the biosig might, for them, say that they have elevated estrogens or poor estrogen conversion or some sort of estrogen issue, and they're healthy and fine. So just little things like that.
Everyone is so confused right now.
Sorry, you guys went down the rabbit hole. I'm sorry, man.
We did go down a rabbit hole.
The problem is, the problem with that one is if you're not already somewhat familiar with what Poliquin was doing with BioSignature and all that kind of stuff, then you have. Well, I'm talking to the audience. Like, you may not know what he was talking about.
All right, audience, I'm sorry for going down.
It's all Max's fault, not mine for introducing it. Not mine.
It's a super interesting topic, but a lot of people are probably like, "Why? What is he talking about?"
5%
binding globulins, and I don't even know what the hell he's talking about.
Body fat doesn't always mean things are going on with your hormones.
There you go.
Simplified. One sentence. I could have just done that.
It took 5 minutes to get there, but whatever.
Let's bring this back to CrossFit stuff instead of hormones. So you guys talk a lot about testing versus training. And a lot of CrossFitters, when they're first starting off, they just test every day and they beat themselves into the fucking ground. So talk a little bit about testing versus training.
Yeah, so it was kind of like the whole sport thing that we got into earlier. To get better at a sport, you don't play the sport, you practice.
Right. You don't just play an NFL football game every day. You can't.
Yeah, and we spoke a little bit about, or I spoke a little bit about how you would go about training different athletes and doing rest recovery stuff and how that could improve metcons when you get back into your specific training phase. But generally, you shouldn't be doing all of your training volume under a fatigued state where your mechanics break down, where you can't recover, where you can't repeat efforts. And if you're doing, like, let's just say a simple thing. You want to get better at thrusters, so you do Fran. 21-15-9. It's 45 total thrusters, 45 total thrusters, and you get it done in 4 minutes. Let's say the last 15 were horrendous in terms of how well they were executed because you were so tired. If you did 12-9-6 of thrusters and pull-ups, and then rested 15 minutes and did that 5 times, you'd get way more total volume of thrusters in a way less fatigued state, and the mechanics of each thruster would probably have been better. So one would be testing and one would be training. To measure progress on that, you have to go through a training cycle where you train the movement and then retest it to make sure that whatever you're trying to go after has improved. But again, that's a lengthy process, and people get into coaching and and I don't want to say it's this community because fitness is very fad-based anyway, but people want results now, and the body doesn't work like that. And if it does work like that, then whatever you were doing previously was really bad, or you were just deconditioned. So that would just kind of be a simple like one-off of what testing versus training was. But I'd say that testing is just not all out. It might be 95% instead of 100, and we get like, you know, shit flicked at us behind our backs for saying things like that and doing energy system training at 97%. And unless you're doing it cyclically, where you're like running or rowing or on a watt bike or on an Airdyne, you really can't quantify metrics of what that means. But I just tell people, like, go really fucking hard, and when you feel like you know that you're spilling over into an area that you can't sustain, just back off a little. Just a little. Yeah. So that would be 97, right? So it's just not going all out. It's not trying to be at a regional. And generally, the only time I ever tell somebody to go all out is in 1 or 2 workouts of a regional. The one that they know is going to be their biggest limitation or is going to separate them, because your body doesn't have the capacity to go all out 6 times or 7 times in a weekend, which is why in like a 400-meter running event, the semifinals and the quarterfinals and all of that are never as fast as the finals. And the people that really do have to spill over in the semifinals blow up in the finals, because your body only has a limited capacity to really tap into its true potential. So my personal philosophy, especially in the sport of CrossFit, is that almost never should anyone be going all out. And the only time you should is if you're trying to close the gap in a competitive environment.
It's like BJ Penn, says he always tries to fight at 80%. Yeah. And then he only has to redline if absolutely necessary at the very end.
Yeah. And that's where interval training comes in. You're talking about breaking it up and all that.
And there's ways to learn how to prescribe it and how to pick the appropriate intensity for different people. And how to pick the movements within an actual Metcon to get a certain response. And that goes back to the Jaguar Buffalo thing. So people who are innately more powerful, if you say, hey, go 90%, they have no comprehension of what 90% is. So you're like, hey, let's row 500 meters at 90%. And then rest 3 minutes, and let's do it 4 times. Generally, in those Jaguars, if the training background is relatively consistent versus a Buffalo, you'll see a very fast time and then very aggressive decreases in power from set to set. In the endurance athlete or the more Buffalo type person, the person who's more well versed in sub-maximal work, their drop off in percentage will be much less. And I'd much rather have that person in a CrossFit setting. But if I am prescribing energy system work, the person who's at the top, if they're doing aerobic training, might get 95% effort, right? Where like they don't really even know how to go all out. Like it's just not in their nature. The powerful person might get the same exact workout, and I'm trying to get the same response. They might get 70% effort because they don't have a conception in their brain of what appropriate work output is, because maybe their background's in fighting or wrestling or football, where you actually almost do always go all out. So they don't have the necessary physiology to understand, well, how am I getting my energy? And is this sustainable? And some of it is ego driven as well, right? Alpha males are like, 90%, I'm going to crush this. And they'll be 2 seconds away from their PR. And I'm like, think you're going to recover in 3 minutes?
There's some guys I can talk to, and before I even see them train, you can tell that they're going to blow up.
Yeah, for sure. And it's common in CrossFit, right? And if you look at the difference between like an okay CrossFitter and then like a regional level CrossFitter, generally it's the power output in the latter half of the workout. It's never the person who's in the lead after 3 minutes in a 6-minute workout. It's about who decreases in power output the most in that last half for the most part. And generally, you know, a powerful person is going to fatigue anyway, so you might have to start them at a higher work rate than the more enduring person, and a lot goes into coaching that and learning what movements redline people, and it takes a long time to learn a one athlete how to coach them in CrossFit, because there's so many variants.
It takes a couple months just to figure out what they need.
Yeah, for sure.
You have a few athletes here at the the Southeast Regional.
Yeah, just Travis Mayer, who's in second place right now.
Okay.
I had one member who was on a team that had some I don't know whether it was team drama or what happened, but he ended up getting pulled off his team.
Okay, I thought that. Was it your fault? No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe.
Yeah, I remember talking to a guy. I ran into him on the street, in fact, and he was telling me that you coached him and he was on a team, and I thought maybe you were coaching the whole team.
No, 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 I'm not.
So yeah, Travis is in second.
Yeah.
How would you categorize him? Like a Buffalo?
Yeah, he's a powerful buffalo. So he still does have some innate power. He cleans 355 or something like that. So he does have some innate speed, probably more than I'd want relative to his strength right now. But I think when we started, he had a 6:30 Helen, like an 18-minute 5K. I have a bunch of longer workouts.
He's a fast guy.
Yeah. And some of speed in terms of running is like, just efficiency of movement, where your insertion points are in your Achilles, and like a lot of that comes into play too with just specifically running. But if you can do that, you got an insane motor. So when I first got him, there were some things where I'm like, you are already elite, and some things where I was like, wow, this is really far off. I don't understand this. Some of it was mobility related. Some of it was training related, how he was training specifically. Some of it was coming off of an injury, and he just happened to like blossom and have all the stars align at the right time. And coaching never takes somebody to the next level. It can basically take you from the level you're on and maybe eclipse you into the next level, unless somebody's with you for like 5 or 6 years. Or you were on something that was really maladaptive. Generally, it's not the coach. It's what's inside the athlete. And the coach is just like an appropriate guide. So I don't want anyone to think that I got Travis here. I just basically gave somebody who had the tools already inside of him and let him expose it at the right time. And I think that's what any coach would do. And anyone who promotes themselves as like the best at anything, I would just be wary of. Like, I don't think I can do what happened with Travis with most people, because most people aren't what Travis is. I just know that I can give people a really good opportunity to get to their potential. So yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
how many athletes do you have going to different regions? How many regional athletes do you have?
10 of my 40, I think, are at regionals through either team or individual, and I think I have probably about 4 who have the capacity to have a chance to make it. And a lot of this sport, whether people like it or not, is subject to what comes out as the workouts. One of them specifically is 6'5", 245. Power output of what he's doing is not going to be taken into consideration. So he's moving his, deadlifts farther in the 315. So it's just inherently going to take longer per rep. And he's moving his entire body of 245 pounds up 30 inches on each rep. So he's just doing more power.
He's running a longer race.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you have to offset people like that who don't have the necessary body with more capacity. I think over time you're going to start to see everyone kind of weed into a specific,
5'9", 190 pounds.
Yep, it's going to be like a bunch of
That's
little,
the prototype.
a bunch of Rich Froning, Dan Bailey, Miko Salos. And you're starting to see it more and more. You don't see as many fringe athletes.
So I think there was a guy who I think he's been doing it for the last few years. He's got a blog where he keeps all the competition statistics. So he takes the numbers from the Open, regional, and the games.
Yeah.
And then he just does a statistical analysis and he publishes that, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I keep on referring to this website, and I can never remember the name of the blog. Do you know, Matt? Because you're a nerd.
He's that guy.
Huh?
CFG analysis.
CFG analysis.
Yeah, I think I've been on that site.
I've actually gone to that site to see how we should be programming before. I'm like, well, this guy's kind of done some analysis. Maybe I can get a better idea how we need to prepare, because you really don't know what to expect. But he's like, well, in 09 they did this, in 10, 11. I was like, well, it's a pretty common trend for the Open to be this way and the regionals to be this way.
Yeah.
And he did one last year or the year before where he was looking at like the size of the average athlete.
Yeah.
And it came out, it was a really cool graph to look at, because the best guys were like 5'9", 190 pounds.
Yeah, and it's just a function of design. If you put if you put really heavy gymnastics bias on a design, I'm sure the little guys are going to skew in favor. If you put a lot of heavy, not weightlifting, but powerlifting movements into something, you're probably going to see more bigger guys just because they're just naturally stronger.
I saw a guy with 7 lats yesterday.
Oh. Seven
lats
on lats on lats.
That's
It was crazy.
I wish I had 8 lats.
Don't we all?
Yeah. And then just one thing that you commented on in terms of how to program for people, I take and James takes a well-balanced approach to developing any athlete. And any year, because the program is random, it could be against us, right? Like in a year that if you're, if the workouts are Olympic lifting heavy and you get 6 workouts that have Olympic lifting out of 9 or whatever, the person with a lot of Olympic lifting volume is going to do well. Or if there's a workout like last year, I think 5 of the 6 workouts had hip flexion in it, right? So if you're just a naturally better puller off the floor and you have good hip speed and you're not a great squatter, you might get away with it. You might get away with getting through a regional without having enough exposure to improving that. So I always have athletes every year who are like, man, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. And then other athletes who it lined up well, but I always take a well-balanced approach and never try to guess. Because I know that the first time somebody thinks they have it pegged out, the governing body is going to change it up. And I'm not in the business of trying to guess what other people do. I'm trying to ensure that everyone I have is continually improving at what I'm working on. And then when the shit comes out, people just got to perform and we just got to hope. And, there's some simple things like if you're really fucking big, all year long, you're going to be doing a lot of gymnastics work. You need to get acclimated to box jumps and double unders and burpees. And again, it's non-fatigued for the most part. And if you're really small, like 150 pounds and under, even if you're more of a jaguar, you're going to be doing a lot more strength work because you need to be almost at your genetic peak.
You got to move a lot of weight
to just be strong enough. So...
You guys have a rough job. You guys are programming for something that you don't really know what you're programming for. Like, you don't know what they're going to have to test at. And so it's hard for you to know exactly how to program. And then I'd imagine after the fact, when people come in and they say, well, this was the workout and this was the workout, you should have done this. And you're like, well, that's easy to know now because you know what the workouts were. And 2 months ago, we didn't know that. So
I gave a speech
it's easy to judge.
at our event.
It's very, very frustrating. Every year around about a month leading up to the regionals, I'm like, fuck this. Like people here, not everyone hears me, but sometimes I'm like, I hate this sport. Because it's like it's at that moment. I think we were hanging out in Arizona at dinner and I was saying that. I was like, this is stupid. And then it's like, as soon as it's over, it's like, all right, let's get back to progress.
I gave a speech at our event, which is the Uptathlon, and it's not like a huge event. It's just something that we think is a well-balanced test of fitness and a get-together of our community, and people speak about progress. And I made the case that it's impossible in the sport of CrossFit to truly measure progress. It's possible within workouts, obviously. It's very easy because, we put the stopwatch on everything or we always take metrics. So it's easy to say, like, okay, I'm getting better. But people are using their place in the open or they're using, specific workouts from the regionals. And when there's an infinite number of things to go after and an infinite amount of weight increases, like, so if somebody just can't clean 225 in 1 year and it only goes up to 155, cleans in a certain year, and they finish 15th in a regional. And then they don't get stronger from year to year, but they improve all their other metrics. And then the first workout is 225-pound cleans, and they just haven't gotten better at that one thing. They DNF, they take last in the regional, and then they think they got worse.
It's almost like judging if you got smarter if you went on 2 different episodes of Jeopardy.
It's exactly.
Like, I don't know. I did really good at one and really not so good at the other, and they're just totally different shows.
So I have... How I measure progress is to, through that initial consult, find an appropriate depth of assessing them and make sure that I'm testing and retesting and saying, like, look, this is what we needed to get better and this is what's better now. So we've gotten better at everything we've retested. And then I use, obviously, the opens and the regionals and the games workouts as some standard metrics because we know they've been used before and we know there's an enormous amount of data to say where do you need to be at this to be where you want to be. Same thing goes for benchmarks, except the benchmark has to be picked appropriately that it actually can be represented in the opens or the regionals and logistically. And, if you think that they're not going to run in the regionals or the opens, which you probably should be thinking at this point if you coach the sport, because they don't want to deal with the logistical nightmare of running at a venue or having different distances, places, and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
The bulk of your training doesn't have to include running. But if you think running is a component of fitness and you want it in your program, you're taking up training time for running. So there's always like this back and forth I have with people to get an indication of like, when you say you want to be good at CrossFit, do you know what that really means? Because if you want to be good in the opens, but you really want to get stronger, they're two basically counterproductive adaptations on the system. Like, why would you spend so much time getting stronger if you want to be good at box jumps and 115-pound deadlifts and push presses? You just need to be strong enough to move that weight. And I would make the case against anyone that the stronger you get doesn't mean that you get more efficient at moving lighter weights for multiple reps.
There's a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah, and there's a few subset of a small subset of people who's usually your genetically elite in CrossFit that will get the adaptations together. So they will increase absolute strength and strength capacity and muscle endurance all at the same time. If you see that in an athlete, get them a really good coach, because that's what you want. You don't want somebody who gets really, really explosive and then does worse on a capacity-based test with the same movement. And you see that with people, just something simple. Some people have 300-pound snatches and they only got 10 snatches in the burpee snatch workout. So what's going on there? Like, I'd rather have that person snatch 230 and get 25 reps in the open workout if their goal is to be a CrossFitter. So
most coaches out there aren't doing individualized programming. Most coaches in the world are programming for an entire gym. An entire base of people who aren't competitive athletes who are just want to get more fit. I don't know how much you deal with that, but do you see a lot of errors with kind of more normal gym programming, or can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a just specific to OPT, we have a blog, right? So people are under the assumption that OPT athletes are blog followers. Excuse me.
Okay. Yeah, actually talk about function, being, will, and how that all works.
Okay, so function, being, will, she are basically just subsets of group training programs. And when I say group, I don't mean performed as a group. I mean a group of people can all get something out of the same workout. Function is basically a workout to improve fitness at a non-competitive level. And we define fitness basically how CrossFit would define it as, work capacity across broad time and orbital domains, an equivalent amount of capacity in all the three main energy systems. I just don't necessarily think that the CrossFit Games or the CrossFit Opens test those. So we train specifically for that. I include running and swimming because I think those are functional skills that need to be in there, and it's not going to produce CrossFitters.
Do you write that programming?
Yeah.
Okay.
The secret's out.
I know, everybody knows.
Being is
So function is level 1.
Yeah, being is just like the next level up. I wouldn't say you're going to really produce regional level athletes out of that. And if you do get into the level, especially now that you're a regional level athlete, I'd say that you really should be on your own program. But it's the next level up, right? It's not going to increase too much in volume. It's probably that 100th to 500th place in a regional type athlete. It's getting exposure to everything. It's testing short, medium, long, an equal amount of volume to aerobic training and lactic training and strength work, skill work in there. Will is basically a games caliper athlete design, and it's all based off of the data that people put in. So there's really only 3 people whose data is aggregated into the assessment of each cycle.
Would you go so far as to say that if you are doing will and you're good enough to do will, then really probably you should be, if you can afford it, doing individualized programming?
So the only reason there is even a will is because we have a lot of people in our community who are really good that don't have the finances for it. But if this is a priority in your life and you have the potential, get a coach. I don't care who it is. Trust them and get a coach. Individual design. She is basically a program that me and James felt was necessary because so many women want to get fitter as defined by the CrossFit Regionals, Opens, Games, and it's purely a function of upper body relative strength. If they're doing chest to bar Fran, it's not their aerobic system or their breathing or their squat strength. It's just they can't finish the pull-ups. Like, they either don't have the finishing strength or they don't have the volume acclimation necessary to get over the rings.
Saw a little bit of that
muscle
today.
ups. Yeah,
There was a huge separation on nothing more than chest to bar pull-ups.
Yeah, so some of that it could be rhomboid strength. It could just be the volume or the number that they're doing. It could
100
be
chest to bar pull-ups for a lady.
Yeah, it's a lot. So I think that there's a mistake in program design that women are doing equal volume of gymnastics work as men. And I think, like, people that
more?
No, less. In testing, in the games and in the regionals and in the opens. And anyone that would say that was sexist can just look at gymnastics as a sport. They don't do the same things. Women aren't on the ring. So there's an obvious disparity in what females genetically should be doing.
So the research shows they've got about 50% upper body and 70% lower body compared to men.
Yeah.
And yet it's across the board in CrossFit.
So I think that and I think you're naturally seeing a much more anabolic female at the games than is truly representative of fitness. Like, you're seeing girls with larger traps and larger delt development and huge lats and excessively lean. And generally, if you probably looked at their, testosterone levels and all of the things that create an anabolic profile, they're much more anabolic than somebody who is just, like, fit. Where if you were just to, like, not take in upper body tests and do a bunch of them. But that's a programming issue. And if you need to be good at the sport, and in training, you need a ton of upper body strength work if you don't have it. So that's why she was developed. But again, everyone, in my opinion, if they want optimal performance, should be on their own program. The group training model is great because it creates communion amongst people, competition. It has its own subset of benefits that training doesn't have. But athletes or people who are only caring about performance, who actually want maximal potential out of themselves, I think should be on their own design. Because if you put a workout on paper, like let's say it's Fran, you're getting an infinite number of different responses relative to what their training background is, how strong their front squat is, how well they can do pull-ups, how fast they can contract. All of those things are going to get a different physiological response. And you can look at, like, oxygen intake and outtake, and they're starting to do testing on this. Like, we do a little bit of, like, lactate testing to see how much is in the blood and how much is pulled out in a certain time frame and all that. So when you're in a group training model, you never know the stimulus that you're giving to a specific athlete. The same thing can be said for percentage-based strength work. Like, if I give 80% to somebody, 80% to one person might be a 3-rep max, 80% to another person might be a 20-rep max. In CrossFit, you're generally seeing that, like, really low neuromuscular efficiency type person who can do, like, 50 reps at 90% of their 1-rep max, which is what you look for. But that's why we just don't believe in group training as a performance tool. Group training is phenomenal in so many aspects. It's gotten people off their lazy asses. It brings in competition to people's lives that they don't have it. It's just for performance, for optimal performance. You should be working on what you need to work on. And it's not a group training model. So maybe that means if you want the camaraderie, you do 4 days a week of your own stuff and 1 day off, and then 1 day of group training and then another day off, or whatever it is. Some people have hybrid designs even that work with me, because they're like, look, the communion and the camaraderie with other people is something I really value in my life. So I'm like, okay, good, you'll get it. But if you tell me your number one goal is making the games and you don't have a coach, or you're not continually researching to make yourself a better athlete, or you're already the champ, then I think something's wrong. And I think some people should have lots of different coaches. They should have a program design coach, a nutrition coach, a weightlifting coach, gymnastics coach, even just people that they consult with to say, like, hey, does my coach know what he's talking about? Or, like, whatever the case is.
I've compared CrossFit to MMA in the past. It's like, how many MMA fighters have just an MMA coach? They've got a boxing coach, kickboxing coach, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. And it's not even
and strength conditioning.
And strength conditioning, obviously. But that's 5 different coaches. And they're all doing the same thing. They're getting in there just to fight. I
think it'll go there
just to fight.
It'll go there over time, I think. I don't think there's enough money, and I don't think the fields are deep enough that mandate that. So many of the top people are saying, like, oh, well, I do this, and it obviously works. But when there's a bunch of genetically elite people that are equivalent of Rich and equivalent of Annie, or even better, that people are D1 athlete conversions or fringe professional athletes, and they really start to achieve their genetic potential, you're going to see some crazy shit. And you're not going to see just regular Joes walk in and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to work hard. I'm like, come on. That'd be like somebody walking in there going to be like, I'm going to fight GSP in a year. Like, if you did that in an MMA gym, people would laugh at you. In CrossFit, the sport is still new enough that people don't realize what they're saying and how much work is going to need to go into that. I think over time it's going to happen. And people will realize that they need good coaches and they need a depth of knowledge, and they need to really take care of their bodies and their recovery and fuel appropriately, and maybe have a medical staff or personal physical therapist. And I think over time it's just going to happen.
Actually, speaking of that, how do you guys deal with injuries? You spoke of a physical therapist. You outsource that
as
best you can?
Yeah, it's not in my scope of practice, right? Like, I do a bunch of research to get better at understanding what could be going on. And obviously this sport is a lot about volume. You need to be training if you want to be good at it. So there's always a period of, I think, when somebody gets injured, there's got to always be a period of deloading. People shouldn't be using up their hormones on not recovering when there's a trauma injury or some sort of an injury. Once that period's over, and it's different for everyone and also different for what the injury is.
What kind of modifications do you make for something like achy shoulders or achy knees, things that are common in CrossFit?
Well, sometimes achy shoulders and achy knees could be a result of the volume being too high, them being too weak in the movements that they're doing at high velocity too often. Like, if you have weak and achy shoulders, I'm going to look at, like, do you do horizontal pull work? Do you do structural balance work on the rear delts and the rhomboids and trap 3 raises and external rotations? Do you do an equal amount of strict pulling to kipping pulling? So I'm going to look at those things first. And then I'm going to think of that as a marker of just systemic inflammation and just too much training that they can recover from. So usually the first thing I do is drop volume and then avoid the area of injury, right? So if they have sore shoulders, I might write 2 or 3 training cycles where they just don't do upper body work if it's not structural balance and it's all under non-speed. It might be concentric tempo lifting, even like 3-0-3-0 lifting, which obviously is not good for performance. Like, no one would ever say to do that, but I consider it like a hybrid rehabilitation. But again, it's not my scope of practice. So if it persists through that, I say, look, go get an MRI. Like, it would just be stupid of you to have sore shoulders all the time and be trying to bury deep snatches. Like, what happens if you tear your labrum and you're out for 8 months? I'd rather you go get it checked out and then be like, look, you got some real bad scarring in there. You know, we might just want to take take 3 or 4 months off, get you healed up, do some horizontal pull work, keep your capacity up in all the stuff that you can keep your capacity up in, and then get back to training. But I consider that common sense amongst...
Not that common.
No, yeah.
It's sense. It's sense. It's not common.
That's right.
Uncommon sense.
Most people's biggest barrier to getting strong is the fact that they get strong and then they get hurt, and then they back off for a little while, and then they get strong and they get hurt again, and that's the cycle.
Ignoring mobility. You know, shoulders are jacked up. Snatching anyway. Getting in terrible positions and can't understand why they keep getting hurt.
And you look at it's so easy to just look at the elite and watch how they move. And every year you're seeing more and more of the original CrossFit badasses or fire breathers who used to move like shit, where people would be like, oh, well, they get it done, gone, right? Either they got hurt or other people just got better than them. And if you look at Annie and Rich move, they're really efficient at everything they do. Even something simple like double unders, like how close their feet are together, where their arms move, how much movement is in their arms, how much vertical height they get off the floor. So efficiency of everything is really important in the sport.
We were talking about that yesterday. I was just watching the girls do the pull-ups. And, I was like, I was telling Doug, I was like, I don't know if it's that my eyes gotten better or if, like, over the years of coaching, or if, like, half the field, it's like every year I go to regionals, I see more and more of the field moving efficiently.
Yeah.
You know, last year was like there's the only difference between the top 3 women and you know, the bottom, you know, 40 or whatever was like the movement. It wasn't always motor. It wasn't always like that they couldn't go there. It was like, but I was seeing like pull-ups where they were like really broken.
Yeah.
You know, between their back and their hips, they were real broken. I was like, and the last ones off they looked terrible.
Yeah,
coming off.
Yeah, I try to compare it to like swimming or running. You never go to an elite level competition of running and watch somebody run where like they're flailing their arms out to the side, and it like. In swimming, you don't see people who are like reaching up and breathing like this and lifting to the side. Like you see everyone is efficient in everything they do. So in a sport that energy production and force production needs to be limited so you can keep working, every little piece of energy you're wasting on shitty movement is a decrease in capacity. And some people, like I'm just going to be honest, some people can't become 100% proficient. Like, some people are never going to sit in the bottom of an overhead squat perfectly vertical with their hands over your head. But that is, A, a liability for you if you're in this sport. B, it probably means you're never going to be elite in this sport. And C, something you need to work on. Like, everyone who I watch move will have skill or mobility drills in certain areas to continue to improve. And Travis is actually a perfect example of that. And I actually had him take before and after pictures just because it was how I reassessed and tested him. And when we first started, he was horrendous at going overhead. I think he had like a 165-pound press, a 265 jerk or something like that. And in a 6 to 8 month period, I think he's well over 300 in the jerk. He's got a 205 press.
And he didn't get that much stronger.
No.
It's more about efficiency.
Yeah, I've never seen anybody increase their press that much who's not, yeah.
What was the biggest fix there? What was the change that was made?
Well, he was just tight. He's tight in his entire anterior chain, like pec minor, lats, hips. So I went on Mobility WOD, and I found like 15 to 20 things. And I sent him all the videos. Good plug to Mobility WOD, by the way.
Really is a great site. That guy, Mike said it best. K-Star made stretching cool.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty big feat, really.
Yeah, for sure.
Because stretching's not that cool.
Yeah.
But he made it cool. Now it's cool.
For sure. And then within the design, like when I first took him over, like something I've always felt that improved people is squat mechanics, like goblet squats and workouts, rear foot elevated barbell split squats, dumbbell split squats, things that challenge that anterior chain and still make you work. So he did a bunch of that. Wall-facing handstands, just a lot of stuff in the design that was supplemental to stuff he was working on. And then also just staying away from the shit that could help contribute to it, right? So he shouldn't be doing 200 kipping pull-ups a week in a period where he's trying to loosen his lats to be more efficient overhead. So it was also the program design in conjunction with what we were working on. And then as we got close to I think the OC throwdown was his halfway point in the skeleton that we peaked him to test out fueling and peaking and try to create a peaking structure for him specifically. Shit, I just lost my train of thought.
How do you program in mobility with the rest of the workouts? Is it before workouts, after workouts, off days, or how does that work for you guys?
Yeah, most of the time I do it on off days or in a separate PM session post-training. I don't really, for an athlete, not somebody who's just like, hey, I want to get fitter, I don't generally cram the sessions. I don't say like, well, do mobility for 45 minutes, do strength for 45 minutes. I'm much more of I want volume in your training, so I want AMs and PMs a lot because I want you working. Even if your heart rate's 10 beats an average or 10 beats a minute above average, so you go in and you're like, hey, I'm on the Airdyne for 5 minutes, I get off and I do mobility work for 10 minutes, and then I get on the rower for 5 and I do mobility for 10. I like the blood flow and circulation and mobility. I like that
for working in volume with mobility.
Yeah, for sure. So I try never to do it just purely as static stretching or static mobility. And then specific things like if somebody's not great overhead and they need to open up for a snatch specifically, I might have them do mobility as a prereq into that session. But I don't say like every day before you work out you're doing bomb. And different people are different, right? Some people don't have the mental capacity to just sit there and stretch for 45 minutes. So I'd kind of take that on a feel-by-feel basis.
I know I don't.
Yeah, I don't either.
Another thing that I'm not sure if this is true or not, but it seems like you guys are kind of the ones that made airdyning popular in the CrossFit world, which it was part of strength conditioning, and CrossFitters weren't really taking on. And then, again, this is maybe just what I think, but I feel like you guys brought that in.
Well, yeah, James used... So, ironically, the Airdyne was my least favorite thing on the planet growing up because I wrestled my whole life, and they were always in wrestling rooms, and grandpas had them.
Yeah, we did rower, Airdyne, and very, like 6-inch high box jumps in the mornings before class, and then went to wrestling practice in the afternoons.
Yeah, for sure.
I used them for warm-ups for baseball.
So
really?
Get on the Airdyne for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to go squat.
There you go.
Yeah. So when I was programming with James, it was just when he was... So he's always had them at his facility, but it was when he started making popular on the blogs and popular in his private clients' designs and all that stuff. I think the thing about the Airdyne that's really good is, it's just a non-impact way to increase volume, right? People like, oh, I'm going to go out for a 20-minute run. And I'm like, well, you're squatting 2 days a week. You're pulling all the time. You're 210 pounds. It's just not smart. Maybe swimming's a good alternative, but with swimming, you got to worry about the shoulders and the amount of volume there with how much mass is on CrossFitters. So it's low-impact volume. It incorporates the upper body and some rotational torque. And then anyone who's used it knows you can do pretty much about any energy system work on it. You can do really high power, high lactate, high fatigue stuff in the legs, moderate effort, aerobic stuff, so long as the muscle endurance of the legs doesn't limit your power as you're doing it. Or you could just do long, easy stuff. Jump on, like I was talking about before, a combo of, would call it zone 1 or eccentric cardiac hypertrophy or whatever you call it. It's just volume, I call it, and mobility combined.
Should we talk about lactic battery training?
We
always make fun of Barrett for using funny ass terms that nobody else understands.
Oh man, that's great.
We call it
you talk about zone 1, and I was like, oh wait, terminology. We got to talk about that shit. So actually, here, talk about some of your favorite intervals on the Airdyne.
Oh, man. James actually did a post on this. It might have been on the membership site. So, I mean, just some simple ones that I really love. 1 minute all out, and you can do anywhere from like 4 to 10 minutes rest. And some people still won't recover. Some people still won't recover in 10 minutes.
As a Jaguar, I know I won't recover.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And you can do 30-30 intervals, like 30 seconds at a percentage. Again, it's variable for the person, but let's say it's somewhere between 70 and 90 depending on who it is, and then 30 seconds really easy, and you do that for anywhere from 10 to 30 intervals. And I think actually
McWhorter does 30-30 at 30.
Yeah, there's a video of Rich Froning's training before the 2012 games, I think, where he's doing 30-30s. And then it became popular amongst CrossFitters who didn't know about OPT, or were people who were like, oh man, I hate the Airdyne, that just became in love with the Airdyne. 10-minute Airdyne for max calories, I think, is a big Jim Jones one. Is horrendous.
That's nasty.
Yeah.
Try to get to 300. Yeah. And then let me know if you do.
Yeah.
And video
Didn't somebody get over 100 in 1 minute?
Yeah, and I think he did 400 in 10 minutes. Wow. But yeah, he's
like elite cyclist shit.
Yeah, Rob McDonald is the Jim Jones guy that does that.
For anyone out there right now, go try to hit a 40 calorie per minute pace and see what that feels like, and then think about doing that for 10 minutes.
Just do 1 minute at 40 calories.
Just try it. Yeah, 40
that'll be all
calories in 1 minute.
And then just something to talk about. I had somebody who was doing the calories from a heart rate monitor. The calorie has to be on a new Airdyne or a newer Airdyne that does it digitally.
It will vary from Airdyne to Airdyne.
Yeah,
I know this.
It definitely will.
Because we score all of ours on Craigslist.
Yeah.
And then, like, if you're trying to compare workouts, if it's not the same Airdyne,
but
won't be the same.
300 on any Airdyne is hard. Even on the Schwincomb Evolution, which is a smaller wheel, it's still hard. If you do it, I'll still be impressed.
I do like rowers and Airdynes because they're so easy to quantify.
Yeah.
Like, one of my favorite things to do is say, find your max RPMs that you can get up to, and then just stay above 90% for as long as you can.
Yeah, for sure.
Or something like that. Like, works easy on the rower too.
Yeah.
That way you know exactly when you're really starting to slack off.
Yeah, and it's also...
Maybe slack's not the best word. Yeah. you can only go so hard for so long.
Yeah. So everyone... Why are you getting so soft?
Slow down.
Yeah, so, I mean... with CrossFit, there's so many different variables that can improve even just a specific workout of power. And like on a rower, once you get a sort of efficient stroke, there's not that many things that are improving your score other than just capacity. With something like, squat cleans and ring dips, for some people it could just be like muscular endurance of the triceps and their power goes up in that specific workout. Or some people it's actually breathing and blood flow. Some people it's efficiency of the squat clean. For some people it's transition time, or whatever the case is. There's all these different variables, and as a CrossFit coach you have to figure out what those variables are. But I always love cyclical retests throughout because they don't lie. You can become a better CrossFitter and not improve cyclical tests, but you can't get improved capacity or improved fitness and not really improve those generally.
So you're taking something that has lower technique than most things, and you're using those things to test capacity specifically. Is that what you're saying?
It's not limited by maybe mobility or technique.
Or just everything to some extent is a derivative of how much exposure you have to it. So people who run competitively, like even short distance runners, like 100-meter runners, still run like 20 minutes in the warm-up, bounding drills, then they run sprints, and then they run easy stuff. Like, you're still getting a ton of volume and exposure to a specific variable. There's just less variables that go in when it's something like running, swimming, rowing, Airdyne, watt bike, than there is when there's squat, snatches, thrusters, muscle up, toes to bar, double unders.
Yeah, for sure.
And the skill itself is generally easier for people to pick up, and mobility doesn't come into play and all that.
What do you think about rowing and watt bikes and things like that being in CrossFit competitions and something that's supposed to be functional movements and not machine based? Is that something that you guys think is kind of weird? Or
yeah, well, the whole functional movement thing, this is sport now. I don't really I don't care if it's functional or not functional. Like, I don't think a snatch, 30 squat snatches for time at 135, like when people are like, oh, you never know when you're going to have to find a boulder and squat underneath it over your head. Like, it's not functional. It's a sport. So when the sport developed, I was like, look, let's make this legit, like a legitimate, valid sport where there's rules, standards, regulations, committees, and the functionality and the definitions of fitness and all the things that define CrossFit as a movement, I don't think necessarily need to bleed into the sport. And the sport, I think, can be separated from the fitness movement. And I think at some point it's going to have to happen because there's way too much of a liability on the gym owners of having all the mass that is CrossFit try to be competitive. Because when you try to bridge that performance gap, there's, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, there's always a decrease in health. And there's a ton of strength and conditioning people that will tell you, like, oh, well, good health ends where good performance begins. And it's not like it's an OPT thing. I just think that there's some sort of balance. It's not a direct correlation, but there is definitely some sort of balance with performance and
health. In 2007, the CrossFit Games probably were a pretty good marker of maybe how healthy you were.
Yeah, and performance. Yeah, for sure.
But in 2013, there's no way that you can do that volume and be operating at optimal health.
And I do have some specific people, and I was one of them. I think I finished 19th in the Southeast Regional in 2011, who show poor health markers with 6 months of deloading and stepping away. Improved health markers. And now it's not training specifically. It's not CrossFit specifically. It's chasing performance. It happened in wrestling. It happens in football, which is why there's a ton of people out there now who are trying to protect people's brains because they know about the long-term effects. And we're just trying to be on the cutting edge of that and say, like, look, there can be effects mechanically and hormonally as a result of chasing this. If you're not chasing it to get a medal or to make money or to get a sponsorship, why risk it? Like, be healthy and keep chasing performance, but make sure you're checking those on other variables. You should have medical testing and body fat and just even like, hey, Are you waking up in the morning happy, healthy, horny? Like simple things. Is your energy levels high? How many hours of sleep are you getting per week? A lot of it is just cultural. It's not CrossFit. Alpha people are just living life too aggressively. And if you're aware of that and you're okay with it, I'm fine. But most people think that it's healthy. I'm like, it's not healthy to sleep 4 hours a day, train twice a day, eat no carbs, and walk around at 5% body fat. It's not healthy. And that might be a personal opinion. I'd get in a dispute with people if people want to disagree with me. It's just my philosophy. And I think as an open source community, there should be people on both ends of that spectrum who can have a debate and just walk away from it like, well, I disagree with you, and that's what I'm going to do, and you do what you do, and I'm glad I heard what you had to say.
So if someone calls you and says, hey, I only slept 4 hours last night, do you alter their programming as a result?
Well, in my initial consult, if people don't sleep enough or don't eat enough, they don't get training until they log a requisite level that I set. And could they lie to me? Yeah, for sure. Like, I don't know.
What would that requisite be?
8 hours of sleep a day, and then based on their whatever their body weight is and what their goals are and what their training is going to look like, just macros that they're hitting on a daily basis. I have some, just off the top of my head.
That means they're eating enough.
Yeah. Sorry. So I had somebody who wanted to gain weight for the sport, wanted to get bigger, wanted to get stronger. 150-pound male was eating 1,800 calories a day on average, wanting to put on 20 pounds of lean mass. I'm like, that's not going to cut it. And I was
double,
like,
maybe triple.
I said go to 4,500 to start, and we tracked like neck measurement, bicep, unflexed, flex, chest, lat. And we just tracked a bunch of measurements and tracked his strength numbers and his weight. And he stayed on a relatively low level of training volume until he was higher. And then when he's higher, if you're adding in the training volume and you start to see the food down, I start to think of like, okay, well, your body and your system is just so stressed that the hunger hormones and all of that stuff just isn't working properly. So I'll just back off from training, make sure they're sleeping more, just little things like that. If people start with me and they're like, hey, I want to make the games, I sleep 4 hours a day, I'm like, well, I'm not going to coach you. Until if you get 8 hours, if you think you can commit to getting that much, I'll work with you and I'll wait through the time that it takes to slowly get to that level. But if you think it's never a possibility, I won't coach you. I'm sure there's a ton of people out there that would. It's just not on me. So that's just another thing that I feel.
So really at the moment you have enough people where you kind of can pick and choose the clients that you feel are the best fit for you as a coach.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's some of it is selfish. Like, I want to set myself up for success. I don't want to take people on there like, oh, I worked with Max and he didn't help me. And I'm like, there's a lot of variables when
they did 20% of what you suggested.
Yeah, or they're adding work in. So I try to source from the initial consultation that like, okay, well, this is going to work. And then there's also an intake form where I can kind of just perceive what's going on. You know, like people who write like paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after thing that they've done and what they're doing and what they did before. And I'm like, wow, this person's really anxious about training and like, where is it really coming from? And are they going to listen to what I say, or why are they jumping? Are they going to jump from me too? How's that going to reflect on me? So, I mean, there's definitely a selfish component of taking on clients that I know I can help and also that I want to help. Like, I don't want to help certain subsets of people that I don't think are going to contribute back to my community in a positive way. Like, even people who are great athletes who just have really horrible attitudes, or who don't think you should pay for coaching, or just because they're good, because they're entitled about their performance, just not something I want to deal with. There's a ton of people that will, because it's great marketing. If I had 50 games athletes, I'd probably make a ton more money. But it's just not who I am as a human being, and I'm making enough now that I can kind of pick and choose what I want to do in the industry.
How many coaches are at OPT offering remote coaching?
Oh, man. I think 4. Yeah, I should know this.
Like, he doesn't know the answer. It sounds like a lot.
Yeah. I think it's 4 or 5.
So even if you're frozen, they can't hire you. They could probably get
so there's some there's James, obviously, who's the most expensive, and then there's me, who's on my tier of pricing, and then there's a bunch of I don't want to call them subordinate coaches because I think every coach has something to offer, but just a lower price structure than me. And if you go on our website or email Chris or Natalie, Chris, K-R-I-S, at OPT Experience, and you want information about that, or you could just email me directly, Max at OPT Experience, if you just have questions about how it works or anything. Yeah.
Cool. I think we'll wrap it up with that.
Okay, cool.
Anything else you want to promote?
No, man, I appreciate the time, guys.
Cool. Thanks for joining us.
So then go to optexperience.com, check out the Big Dog blog with Function Being Will, which is your programming, all right?
Yep, so optexperience.com /blog, or the website's being redone, but there's a little Big Dogs tab which will take you to the blog. The CCP site is Coaching Certification Program, which will give you a breakdown of all the courses that we offer that you can look at. And then there's an upcoming events tab that you can see, like camps that we do or upcoming courses that are in person or whatever. And then I think optccp.com will be the actual online courses if you don't have the money to travel. But in any case, if you have the chance to actually hear the word from the horse's mouth, I'd always suggest in person, because you can ask questions. When you do things, unless you're very self-motivated, when you do things online, you're going to be multitasking and not taking notes and kind of get bored. Like, scientific information is not always the most fun thing, but when it's in a personal setting, you're going back and forth, it's much easier to digest. You can stop, you get breaks, you get it all crammed in a certain amount of time, you go away with the notes. So I'd suggest in person if you can A, afford it, and B, the timeline set up if you really want to get the courses done as soon as possible. The online ones are still pretty good.
Very cool. Got anything, Doug?
Yeah, if you want to get individualized coaching, obviously Mike's tapped out at the moment, and Max offers it, but he's tapped out at the moment too. So these guys are tapped out, but there's other guys available at OPT Experience. If you can afford that, it's a fantastic option. If you're a person that's not trying to go to regionals or go to the games, but you just want some more general blog programming, but you might not have a coach right now, and you want to have at least some community, and you're not a part of a regular CrossFit gym, we do have our 6-month muscle gain program where Mike writes all the programming for a full 6-month period, and it's very strength heavy, strength training heavy, and specifically weightlifting heavy, where you can improve your lifts and put on some muscle mass. And then we have a Facebook group where all the guys in that program are interacting on a daily basis with me, Mike, and Chris Moore. And we're doing one right now, and it's been super successful. The guys are making great progress, and they're getting a lot of value out of that Facebook group where they can interact with us as well as the other people in the program. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go to barbellshrugged.com, click on the shop, and then you can click on online coaching, and you can sign up to be on the waiting list for the next program.
And I think you should go to barbellshrugged.com and just sign up for the newsletter. And if you live in the Atlanta area, next month, July 6th and 7th, we'll be at Brandon Phillips Gym, CrossFit Bound, doing a training camp. It'll be Doug, Chris Moore, and myself kind of doing workshops on our specialties and what we do well. And then we'll be back here in Florida at CrossFit Siege, August 10 and 11, I think.
10, 11, or 12 and 13th, whatever that we were, like the second weekend
something
is.
Like that. You can register for those at barbellshrugged.com, click on seminars, and just kind of see what's offered there. So, see you next time. Thanks, Max.
Yep. Thanks, Max.
I sweat my balls off on your things, man.
It's all right.
Oh, I'm gonna piss in my